Hey guys, how's it going? Comparing here. So today I want to talk about reflect damage and the mechanics involved in it that relate to Volpact. So before I go into the details, which I'm sure most of the stuff that the more advanced people are interested in, I want to tell you guys basically how Path of Exile works and why it's difficult to do a lot of damage. So in this game, there's something called reflect damage aura that sometimes the monsters have, sometimes the map mods induce on all the monsters within the map. And what this does is when you hit a monster for a set amount of damage, let's say with Freeze Pulse, if it has Magic Reflect, it'll reflect 18% of the damage per reflect. So if it's just reflect monster, it'll be 18, but if it's a reflect map mod, it'll be 18 plus 18 to the user that cast the spell on it. So this is a pretty interesting mechanic. It does get reduced by your resistance. So if you have, for instance, like I do, well, in this present moment, I guess, 77 cold resist. So if I hit him for like 100 damage, I take 18% of that, and then I take 23% of the 18%. So it seems like it's not that much, and it typically is not. But when you take characters to extreme levels, when you get a lot of damage passives, or when you combine a medium amount of damage passives with a lot of gear, this scales like crazy. In this game, it's similar to that of like Diablo 3, for instance, on this account. A lot of the damage that you do is scaled through crit. So if you do a lot of crits, and if you have a high critical multiplier, you do tons of damage, and that's the main way to scale damage in this game. That's why totems and things of similar sorts are so ridiculously overpowered, because the damage doesn't get reflected. But in my case, with my character, I cast a spell, I take the reflect damage. As such, I have to balance out this crit multiplier. I can't have it too high, because I'll kill myself in one hit before I notice what's going on. And, you know, with a typical character like mine, I have to curve my survivability with my damage. For instance, if I had, 4,000 life instead of 7,000 life, I wouldn't be able to do as much damage as I would because I would die. I would kill myself against Reflect, often not even seeing it, not even knowing about it. So there's a few things that you can do about this in this game. The main one is people like to go Volpact, and this is the skill that they're talking about when they do this, and this is a skill that I'm going to adapt to my build on my Discharger. The main thing that makes Volpact a not so friendly passive is that, see, Life Leech applies instantly rather than Lifesteal being applied as a heal over time, which it does. And this mechanic allows you to not die instantly to Reflect because you're Life Leeching instantly as each other monster is hit. So if you hit 20 monsters, you're going to do damage and Life Leech off one of them, then the next, then the next, then the next. And the opposite case, when you don't have Volpact, you hit them, you take all the reflect damage all at once, well, in sequence, but it doesn't really make any difference because the Life Leech happens as a heal over time. It's time-based. And the most you can heal for is 20% of your life a second. And this heal doesn't come into play until you do all your damage, until you take all the reflect damage. So Volpact lets you bypass that, as I mentioned, but the problem is life recovery from flasks and regeneration has no effect. So Volpact is really not so viable with life-based characters because, if you ended a fight on a low amount of life, or if you had things hit you, you're at a huge risk to get that life back through Life Leech while you're trying to find new monsters. What people tend to do is they use it with Chaos Inoculation or certain low-life builds. The reason this is important is because Chaos Inoculation builds, or just Energy Shield in general, does not go by the regeneration mechanics of life. For instance, regeneration of Energy Shield happens at 1/3 of your Energy Shield every second after a given amount of time when you have not been hit. And that is not affected at all by Volpact. So people who go Volpact tend to go Chaos Inoculation. They have Energy Shield based characters. Now, this doesn't mean they can't die to Volpact, and this is what posed me to make the study that I did yesterday, and why it makes certain builds like my Discharge build so complicated. The math has to be dead on. There are some things that affect Reflect on a monster, and these things have to be taken into account. So you have to know about your maximum damage. So when you hit something, you hit from a range, but it's the maximum that will eventually kill you in one hit. And that's what it's going to take to kill you with Volpact. While the leech does happen instantaneously, it happens in a way where you leech and then you take the damage from the Reflect. This is an interesting mechanic because if one target can one-shot your character, then you will still die with Volpack. And there are a few mechanics that I'm going to discuss that perhaps are not so obvious, perhaps you didn't know about. So this one-shot mechanic is something you have to calculate, but the way I calculate it is, yes, it's only 18% reflect, but sometimes you do a minus max map, so instead of 75 resists, you have 50, you're going to take double, or in some cases more than double if you're above 75 resists. In other cases, it's a reflect map and you encounter a reflect monster. In other cases, you are shock stacked, so you take more damage, which does affect the reflected damage. In other cases, you can have a map mod where like monsters do 35% more damage, or the monster itself, the rare monster, says deals extra damage or something like that. That will actually multiply the reflected damage. So all these things can add up, and you can have a multiplier of reflect close to like 3 on your damage. So instead of like 18%, you can get it close to 300% reflected damage. So accounting for all that is what makes this game very, very tricky. When you're using it with, when you're doing this kind of calculation with spells like I am with Discharge, your life leech is essentially capped. It's capped by the life leech gem, which goes to about 9%. And while you can still one-shot yourself if you don't have enough life against an individual target, and you have to account for that, you have to account for the other factor of the input-output equation, because your life leech is only 9%, while you may only be reflecting like 4% of the damage, which is typically what happens if you have about 80% resist against normal reflect. It may be double reflect, it may be extra damage reflect, you may be shock stacked. So this input-output function sometimes will reach a level where while you are healing instantly, you're not healing for as much damage as you take from reflect. So let's say you hit one target, while you heal for, let's say, 500, it may deal 1,000 reflect to you. So if you hit enough of those targets in the same cast or before you notice what's going on, you might fall victim and die with Volpack to the input-output problem. The third thing that I want to bring to you guys, which is largely what I learned yesterday, is overkill damage. So I'm not 100% sure on the numbers, but we did realize some things that are significant. So hitting a monster with reflect that has practically no life, yesterday I found out that reflects almost, or perhaps actually reflects full damage, but the life leech does not apply to overkill damage. So why is this significant? Well, if a monster only has one life and you hit it for, a high amount of damage that will, cause your character to take back 1,000 damage in reflect, you're not going to heal for anything, because the effective damage done to the life of the monster is 1, which will get rounded to 0 life leech. But you'll still take the 1,000 reflect damage, or perhaps there's a multiplier, I'm not too sure, it's hard to calculate these things. You'll still take the overkill damage in reflect. So if there's enough monsters with low life, and you hit them hard enough with an ability, you're not going to leech enough, and you're going to fall victim to the overkill damage that leads to the input-output equation. So if you kill enough of them, don't leech enough, you may actually die with Volpack. And all these things can kind of come together and end up killing your character. That's why Volpack, for some characters, it helps a tremendous amount. It's not reflect immunity. And it's largely why you always have to be very careful in this game, unless you're using a build centered around traps, centered around totems, or centered around minions, or you just don't do any damage. So that's about it, guys. Hope you guys learned something. Hope you guys get a little bit more insight on the game, as I did yesterday when finding out a bulk of this knowledge. Maybe use it to make your character a little bit stronger. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.